Cool. So, hey everyone, I'm super excited to be joined today by Debbie Steinbock. And Debbie specializes in nutrition and diet and holistic nutrition. And a little bit about Debbie before we kind of get rolling into this interview. So, she dealt with chronic illness, digestive illness herself when she was younger, and that's kind of how she came to this path of helping other people with diet and nutrition related to digestive disorders and a lot of other conditions. But basically, here's her little bio. So, after years of being told that she had an incurable chronic health condition, she turned to her diet to help her understand her disease, restore her body, and regain control of her health. Her own life experience motivated her to become a nutrition counselor and natural foods cooking instructor. And she now educates and inspires others, like I was saying. So Debbie is just passionate about working with individuals with challenging and chronic health conditions. And just because she's navigated that road and kind of been down this process of, getting to the point where maybe you can't eat a lot of foods and you're really struggling to incorporate things in your diet and things are, causing your body to react. Like, what do you do? And Debbie has really good experience, personal experience going down that route. And now she helps other people in her clinical practice in Colorado. So Debbie received a Bachelor of Arts degree with honors in psychology from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And she earned certifications as a holistic health counselor at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition in New York City. And she's also accredited by the American Association of Drugless Practitioners. That's pretty cool being a drugless practitioner, I gotta say. So, first of all, Debbie, anything else you kind of want to let people know maybe about you? Where's your practice? And yeah.
Yeah. So I started my practice back in 2000 in Manhattan after I graduated nutrition school. And then I moved 2001 out to Boulder, Colorado. Yeah. And I've been here in practice for going on 18 years now.
Awesome. Cool. So let's kind of just dive right into this diet and nutrition topic. It can be so confusing and so frustrating for a lot of people. So it's just going to be good to hear from you and how you help patients and what your approach is. So basically, I just kind of want to start out with just the basics of nutrition for maybe people who have normal digestive systems. And then we'll get into more of like when your gut's really having issues and it's compromised, maybe you're in a disease state, how do you go from there? So, but I think it's important to kind of educate people on the basics of, nutrition, what kind of foods you should be eating, and, just a little bit of that before we get into the digestive system.
Sure, and I'd love to. And do you want me to share with your audience kind of how I got into nutrition? Because we've touched upon that a little.
Yeah, definitely. Share with us.
Okay. So basically, when I was 18 years old, actually the summer right before I went off to college, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which is an inflammatory bowel disease. And, at 18 years old, I didn't know a whole lot about anything, and they just gave me drugs, and so I was convinced that I would just take a pill and everything would be good.
Yeah.
And what happened to me was actually totally the opposite, and so I spent pretty much the first 2 years of college taking lots of different medication and really struggling with my digestive system still. And I always tell people that, for better or for worse, back then in 1995 or 6, there was really not a whole lot of medications available for Crohn's.
Yeah.
And I had gone through and exhausted all of them. And in fact, at that point, they actually enrolled me in like some medical trials to see if new experimental medications would work for me. And so what I always tell people is getting into nutrition was really like my last ditch effort to try to like save my digestion because nothing was working for me. And, I didn't have any holistic background. My family didn't think that way. And so I got into nutrition about my junior year of college, really on my own. I can still remember going to like Borders bookstore because there was no internet at the time.
Yeah.
And there was one book on Crohn's disease, and it was Elaine Gottschall, Breaking the Vicious Cycle, which is now, the specific carbohydrate diet is how people know that book.
Yeah.
And so I did that diet for a full year. And even though it didn't cure me, what it did do was it opened my eyes to realize, like, hey, what I'm putting in my diet may have a big effect on this condition that I'm dealing with. And so that was really like the door that opened for me into looking at nutrition and figuring out like how diet and the foods that I'm eating, might possibly affect my digestive system.
Yeah.
And so as I started to see improvements there, I actually took a total career change, whereas I had been in college and believed that I was going to be a therapist and graduate and go get my PhD. Instead, what I did was I found my nutrition program and decided to, do that for a year, put my PhD off, and here we are now, 18, 19 years later, and as they say, the rest is history.
Yeah, it's so interesting how kind of, the life path unfolds, right? Because I never expected that I'd be doing this either. So it's very interesting, and, kind of like you talked about in your story, a lot of times people have a similar type of situation where, they get sick and then they start investigating other things. And even like you were talking about, like you went towards kind of the conventional medical route and tried all the drugs and all the, the different things that they recommended, but you still like weren't getting better, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I mean,
exactly.
It's super. I know that probably a lot of people who are listening to this or in the audience probably have been through a similar type of situation, and it's frustrating, but there is hope because there's other things you can do, like you talked about. This kind of sparked your interest into diet to help you heal, as well as other alternative medicine practices. So really cool. So I guess to start with, just by doing that specific carbohydrate diet, like what did that really like teach you? What did that open your eyes to as far as like what you should be eating, diet, nutrition, especially with, a sensitive stomach?
Yeah. So what it, first showed me is, even in college, of just like what a whole food is.
Yeah.
Like what is like an unprocessed, unadulterated, untouched food.
Yeah.
And it's not that I grew up on a bad diet. I grew up in New York, so of course there was a lot of pizza and Chinese food and Italian food and all of that stuff. But being on that diet really made me look at foods differently and, realize how much to some degree of processed food I had, and chemicalized foods even, that I did have, throughout my diet for most of my childhood.
Yeah, definitely. So that's cool to kind of see that first insight. And, would you say that like, the main thing that you've kind of learned overall is like eating whole foods is like kind of one of the most important pillars in diet, right? Whichever type of diet you choose, there's a lot of different diets, right? Like there's FODMAP diet, SCD diet, there's, low fermentation. There's all these different diets, right? But like, I think the core component of a lot of these healthy diets, especially for digestive disorders, is, eating real food, right? Eating whole foods.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And so, going back to the other question that you said is kind of like, what's the basis of nutrition?
Yeah.
And I say this, 15 times a week in my office, but, if we start with like a whole foods approach, what does that mean? So that means that we eat lots of vegetables. So green leafy vegetables, non-starchy vegetables, and we'll get into the subtle nuances of how that changes depending on the digestive concern you're dealing with.
Yeah.
But, we want, good quality vegetables. The second thing is we want fruits. We want to eat a moderate amount of fruit. We want to eat that in season.
Yeah.
Then we want to have protein sources. and we want to have protein from, animal or vegetable proteins.
Yeah.
And then you get to carbohydrates. And with carbohydrates, that would mean that we have like the whole grains in their whole form. So things like brown rice or quinoa or buckwheat or, oats, whatever that might look like, as well as the vegetable starches.
Yeah.
So things like your sweet potato, your butternut squash, your rutabaga, your turnips, your beets, etc.
Yeah.
Good fats and oils and adequate hydration. And that's kind of the basis of a whole foods diet. But then what we have to do is we have to individualize that for each person based upon whatever health conditions they might be dealing with. So, for example, with the population of your listeners, so people that are dealing with SIBO or IBS, they might have to choose, foods that are lower in fermentable starches. They might not do as well with things like cruciferous vegetables.
Yeah.
My clients that have inflammatory bowel disease, my mantra in my office is that from whatever the categories I listed they choose from, they have to do things that are like softer, warmer, mushier, not a lot of raw foods, but leaning more toward like soups and stews and crock pot meals and things like that. So really individualizing it based on, what your digestive health needs.
Definitely. Great kind of segue. I just want to talk more about, let's say someone comes in with pretty severe digestive issues. Maybe they're in the IBS, SIBO category, like a lot of my audience. They have a compromised gut. They're reacting to a lot of things. So what's kind of your process? How do you start there?
So sometimes things people are reactive to can generally give you a clue as to what's going on.
Yeah.
Meaning that, if somebody's really reactive to the high FODMAP foods, I might at that point decide to do a test for them to see if in fact they do have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Yeah.
And so and then sometimes they just have no clue, like everything is just kind of bothering their system. And so at that point you want to just help them to find a diet that keeps their symptoms controlled as best as possible for the short term.
Yeah.
Okay? That's not a long-term solution. And then seeing if you could do some testing, whether that's some SIBO testing or stool testing, to see if that indicates, what might be going on for the individual.
Yeah.
And if there's SIBO, definitely doing a protocol to eradicate SIBO. If there's, not SIBO, but there's a lot of large bowel dysbiosis or fungal overgrowth, again, doing a protocol that addresses that.
Yeah.
And using diet at that time, like I said, to really just minimize symptoms while they're going through treatment. And then what happens for people most of the time is once they get through treatment, and then you put in things to reheal the lining of the digestive tract and to put in, good probiotics to rebuild back their digestive flora, then what happens is they can kind of incrementally increase the variety of foods that they're able to tolerate and do well with.
Definitely, and I've actually seen that personally. Like when I was kind of more in a severe state and really having a lot of really bad issues, I was reacting to a lot of different things and I couldn't eat a lot of foods. But as I got a little bit better gradually, I was slowly able to eat a wider variety of foods and go out to restaurants and eat a burger, do all those things, right? And it's it takes time and it's a gradual process, right? But I think that,
exactly.
So basically at the beginning, you kind of just want to, it's best to kind of get the person on a diet where it kind of controls their symptoms, right? And then you're also focusing on what other issues that you can treat are. And then, eventually getting to that stage where they can maybe incorporate some more diversity. Is that kind of correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. So, do you have any, when you're starting someone on, maybe they're more in a severe state, do you recommend a specific type of diet, or is it more just kind of like an elimination type phase where they kind of monitor what they're reacting to?
So what I found in, the almost 20 years that I've been practicing, probably about 12 years ago, I myself went on a gluten and dairy-free diet.
Yeah.
And that helped me so much. And at that point, I started recommending that to my clients and, had people who, just had such great success with that. And I now understand that those two proteins are just really difficult to digest proteins. Yeah. And so if you have a more challenged digestive system, the thing that's going to go first is the ability to digest the hardest to digest proteins.
Yeah, exactly.
So I generally start by pulling people off of gluten and dairy so that we could just stop the strain on their digestive system and really just give their body like more of the energy resources to use for other things. And so at that point, once they're off of gluten and dairy, people might know other foods that they suspect or feel that they're reacting to, like eggs or corn, or sometimes I'll just have to point out, like, one of the more common things that I hear in my practice is somebody saying to me something along the lines of, I have no clue what to eat. I made X for dinner on Sunday night, and I ate it. I felt completely fine. I felt fine all day on Monday.
Yeah.
I ate the leftovers on Monday night, and I felt horrible. How can that be when I ate the same food, Yeah. And that, like I said, those are the clues that, like, if the food reaction is not repeatable, then to me it goes back to there's generally something that's off in the state of the digestive system that needs to be looked at. And of course there's other factors outside of that too, like, was Monday more stressful than Sunday?
Totally. Yeah, and I it's such a good point, just because I agree, and it's like, diet for sure is a fundamental component of, healing your gut through time. But I think it's, like you said, you have to be careful and not to take it like to the extreme where, because in that example that you talked about, it could be stress, it could be, dysbiosis, and it may not just be the specific foods, right? So it's important to have a healthy whole food diet, but I think it's also important to realize that, stick to the, the big things that are causing issues, right? Like you said, dairy, gluten. What I found personally in talking to a lot of people is that, the main ones that I see a lot are like dairy, like you said, gluten, and then like some of the more tougher to digest fibrous vegetables, like maybe broccoli, cauliflower, a lot of onions, a lot of garlic, stuff like that. So, but I think just not going overboard too, because you see a lot of times that people will try and measure every symptom, right? And try and look at what they ate and try and equate it. And sometimes that's not healthy to do that constantly. So.
Exactly. And that's what I see in my practice is that if somebody's following a diet and, restricting certain foods and it's working for them and they're getting symptom relief from that, then that's either good or that's a good sign as to what might be going on. But what I really caution people against is just taking more and more foods out of their diet to the point that, they think that the only way that they can feel well is with eating, a total of 5 foods, in a day or at all times. And that I really cautious people against because, that really leads to nutrient deficiencies. And then clearly there's like a root of something that hasn't been discovered yet because, we shouldn't have to eat only 5 foods total, to be able to feel and function.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, just from your experience and what you've seen, like, do you find that, like, when people are down to, like, let's say they're eating 5 foods and, like, they're really just having issues, like, is it in a lot of cases probably that there's other stuff going on, right? It's not just the diet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just the diet, and oftentimes it's not just the digestive problems. And what I mean by that is that if someone's digestion is generally that compromised, the times that I've seen that, there's generally something going on either elsewhere in their body or in their life that just has their nervous system or their immune system on some sort of a red alert. And what I've learned, I've had two big health journeys in my life. The first one, as I shared, was with Crohn's disease. And the second time, after my daughter was born, I developed Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And I use this as an example all the time. So I had such great success with my Crohn's, with changing my diet and taking nutritional supplements that, as I said, that became my career and my focus. Well, fast forward, after 20-something years or 15 years of very good health, I came down with another autoimmune disease. So my focus becomes like, okay, what do I need to do to change my diet more? I'm already on a whole foods diet. Maybe I need to go paleo. What supplements do I need to take? And really followed that same mindset that had healed me the first time, only to have no success healing the second time. It was like taking my diet from being 90% great to 95% great didn't really give me the results. And what I realized at that time, that the Hashimoto's that I got was really just a bigger picture or symptom of my life in general and the stress that I was under and the way that I internalized that stress and, how that was affecting my adrenals and my thyroid and all that stuff. And so, long story short, sometimes the thing that actually heals what you're dealing with is actually outside, of diet and nutrition.
Yeah, definitely. So this brings up a really good question that I have is let's say you try someone on a diet that's like maybe the SCD or, avoiding gluten and dairy for a certain length of time. And, let's say you give them that and you're thinking that maybe diet's one of the issues that's really needs some work with in this patient. And then like how long, let's say they're on that diet for a certain length of time, how long until you say okay, the diet's in place, they're still not getting better, this has to be something else. How long do you go there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say generally in my practice, I always start with making dietary changes. And usually people, I'm surprised, sometimes in as little as 3 to 6 weeks, someone might see some really big changes that tell us, okay, we're really moving in the right direction. And if that just continues, then we just continue with that. And of course, that depends on when the person comes in, how processed or, chemicalized their diet is. We didn't even get into things like caffeine, alcohol, sugar, besides gluten and dairy free, when you have somebody that's subsisting on coffee for their entire morning and then, lots of processed food and sugar foods and beverages, I can have a pretty good idea that when we take those, I call those extreme foods, when we take those extreme foods out of their diet, we are going to allow their body and their gut microbiome and all that to come back much more into balance. However, if somebody comes into me and they're on a super clean diet and they really haven't seen the result that they'd like to, at that point we might, go in and do some testing fairly early on, because they're frustrated, they've been committed to this for sometimes over a year, and you want to see if you can help them get answers at that point.
Definitely. So, cool, yeah. So then a couple other points that you brought up that are just good to talk about. So what is your take on coffee, right? Let's say my audience, right? People who maybe have a chronic digestive disorder and, what is your advice there with coffee and,
Okay. So my advice is always that you should, when you asked before about an elimination diet, is in some ways, avoiding gluten and dairy and the extreme foods, that's kind of my version of doing an elimination diet, is really just eating good quality whole foods in the forms that are easy for your body to digest. Like I said, that might mean more cooked foods for some people. if someone tends to constipation and they really need the roughage, it might mean more raw foods and more nuts and seeds for another person. And once you've kind of, figured out what works for you, then what I always tell my clients is it's not like I'm against coffee or alcohol.
Yeah.
What I want is them to find what works for them.
Yeah.
So then you bring that food back into your body and let your body tell you how it works for you. And I have clients that will sit in my office like begging and pleading, like, please don't take away whatever. I'm like, I'm not going to take away anything. You decide what works for your, what you're willing to do, and then reintroduce it and see if your body's able to maintain its good functioning at that point. And if it does, fantastic. You have your answer. If it doesn't, that's also fantastic because you know it doesn't work for you.
Yeah, definitely. That's such a good point because, like, probably, like, as you know, everyone's body is so individualized. And, like, for example, for me, like, I know that if I have too much caffeine, it's not going to be good for myself because my body gets too ramped up and it just causes problems. But if I have a little bit when I'm feeling, good, it's fine. So it's like, it's just kind of like listening to your gut, kind of monitoring, how you're feeling, right? Really being in tune with your body too.
Exactly. And our biggest resistance is actually around not wanting it to be that way.
Yeah.
Meaning that we have such an attachment to the coffee or the alcohol or whatever it might be that we don't want to hear from our body that actually isn't working for us.
Yeah, definitely. And, it could be the case that maybe a couple glasses of wine or, a little bit of caffeine is okay for some people. And it just depends, right? So.
Exactly. In general, I find that if my clients can follow what I call either an 80-20 principle or a 90-10 principle based on, the severity of the person and their symptoms, where 80 to 90% of their foods are healthy and whole and unrefined, then they have that wiggle room of that 10 to 20% of whatever it is that they love. Like for me, it's chocolate. That is like, I love chocolate. I never want to live life without chocolate.
Who doesn't love chocolate? Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. But I want to have chocolate in my life in a way that it doesn't cause me any distress.
Yeah.
So for some people, their chocolate is their coffee or their alcohol. So it's just about finding the amount that you can have those foods in your life and the forms you can have them in so that you feel good most of the time.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think that, like, having, like you said, the 80-20 or the 90-10 principle, like having that 10 or 20%, do you find that that's, like, really helpful? Because I've found personally that, like, when I go, like, super crazy about, like, diet and when I was in the, like, super restrictive mode, it was almost, like, putting just way more stress on my body in general. And when I allowed myself to kind of, like, just eat some, normal, like let's say a burger or something like chocolate, something like that, like, it actually kind of let me relax a little bit, and I thought it was good for me, at least. So
that's like one of my biggest principles in my practice with people is that there's no absence of a lack of resources in 2018 where people can find all the foods that they shouldn't be eating anymore.
Yeah.
And what I always tell people is that all of that needs to be weighed out against the stress of doing a diet that's that restrictive. So, if somebody is following some sort of diet where, they have no histamines and no oxalates and no gluten and no dairy, no alcohol, no caffeine, then they get into a situation where they cannot socialize at all. Every work function becomes stressful. Nobody in their family is eating the same foods as they're eating, so they're like a, short order chef who's making multiple meals. And that in and of itself creates like a very big degree of stress for the individual, most likely.
Yeah.
And so, that always needs to be weighed upon how much benefit is going to be derived from what they're doing. And so, with that said, there's some people who you just tell to take dairy out of their diet, and that creates stress for them. So I'm not saying you just get a free pass if it stresses you out. I'm saying that, you need to get support around it to make these changes to your health for sure. But when we get to these like multiple levels of restriction, I think what that does is just puts our body into this stress state, this fear, this, fight or flight state. And we know that all healing needs to happen when our body's in our parasympathetic nervous system. I mean, it's literally called your rest and digest nervous system.
Yeah.
So if you're constantly in stress and fight or flight, you're not helping your digestion at all.
Yeah, and I feel like that's, from my experience too, I feel like that's almost like just as important as diet sometimes, is like, getting to that point where like you're not, freaking out or just like constantly worrying, right, about everything. And it's hard sometimes, because I've been there, and when you're having trouble and having severe symptoms and stuff, and you can't eat a lot of food, it is tough. But I think just adding a little bit gradually and having a little more diverse of a diet is helpful, just so that you can maybe go out with friends and do those things, because social interaction is like so important too, if you can get out and be with people. So
exactly. Yeah.
So I guess last question here is like any any parting advice, anything you've seen as far as like people with IBS, SIBO, as far as diet and nutrition. I mean, what should they know, right? Like, what have you seen in people who are able to maintain it consistently, right? Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is a lot of people go on these diets, right? Like whether it's a low FODMAP, SCD, or eliminating certain foods, and they'll do it for a month, and then they'll kind of get out of it and get back off track. So what do you see in the people that are consistent over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the biggest factor that I see that makes people be consistent and makes people be successful over time is sticking to something long enough to actually get the results from it.
Okay.
Which involves a lot of patience. And health is a long road to recovery for some people. And you've been there, I've been there. It's longer than most of us would like it to be. And what I often see in my practice is the people that are most successful, they find a plan that feels right for them, and they stick with it for a long enough time to really see the results. Where I see people get messed up a lot is that the minute they have a symptom come back in, they start to change course. And they think that they're on the wrong path, and they go down a totally different approach. And then nothing's really given, the length of time that it takes to really allow the body to heal. And the truth is the road to recovery, I actually have a picture in my office that I pull out no less than 5 times a week. And it basically shows the road to recovery. There's this little guy at the bottom who's kind of crashed out, and then he's jumping up at the top over here, 100% well. And the chart shows progress, setback, progress, pitfall, progress, plateau. And it's this really up and down thing to go from here to here. And so it's, the journey back to health is really one of ultimate trust, of, trusting that you're in the right hands with a good practitioner, trusting that your body has the resources to heal, and trusting that when you have those setbacks and those pitfalls and those plateaus, that you could still be on the road to recovery.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, just consistent, gradual process, right? And just kind of, I guess, faith in the plan, and kind of small changes, right? Small healthy changes implemented over a long period of time. Would you say that's accurate?
Exactly. And I would say that one thing that I would add to that is to really use a holistic approach. And what that means to me is what we talked about already, that it's not that we stick with the plan and the plan is only diet, or the plan is only supplements, or the plan is only an elemental diet. It's really, being willing to take a step back and ask ourselves, how does our lifestyle work for us? How does all the travel that we do? How does how does the relationship we're in? All of those factors that influence how our body feels and functions beyond the food that we put in our mouth, are such an integral part of our healing. And sometimes we come into it, like I said, very narrow-minded, where we're willing to change one thing, but all of these other things are off limits. And the most successful people, and where I have the most success in my own health, is when I'm really willing to just look at the whole picture of everything and, address all those areas that my body is telling me need to be looked at.
Awesome. So if anyone maybe wants to reach out or work with you, I guess a couple of things. Do you do like Skype consults or phone consults?
I do. Yeah, I work with clients all over the country. In fact, all over the world. I have some clients right now in India and in Europe.
Awesome.
And I do phone sessions with people. My practice is located in Boulder, Colorado, and it's called Mindful Nutrition. And yeah, I work with people here outside of my office as well as just around the world.
Awesome. So Mindful Nutrition is it, if someone wants to find you online, can they search Mindful Nutrition? Is it mindfulnutrition.com?
Yeah, Mindful Nutrition or Mindful Family Medicine, because I have a joint practice with my husband who's Mindful Pediatrics. Awesome. And so our website, any of them will get you there, Mindful Nutrition or Mindful Family Medicine.
Awesome. So thanks so much, Debbie, for joining me and just chatting a little bit about diet and kind of sharing some of your knowledge and wisdom on this topic. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Josh. It's great to connect with you.